Welcome to a place where your mind can finally rest. Hi, my name's Ashley, and I'm from Canada, and this is our new sleepy channel called Drift Away Tales. Each week, my goal is to post a beautiful bedtime story, something that's going to bring peace and calm to your soul. But in the meantime, I would love to learn a little bit more about my listeners, where you're listening from, and what kind of stories make you the sleepiest. Thank you so much, and let's get to the story, and I'll see you on the other side. As you settle into your favorite cozy spot, let the gentle rhythm of these stories guide you into a restful sleep. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let go of the day's worries. Here in the safety of this moment, it's okay if you don't reach the end of the tale. My only wish is that you drift away into sweet, comforting dreams before the story concludes. Sleep well and let the calm embrace of Driftaway Tales carry you into the night. This story is called Nature's Wisdom. Are you ready? Okay, let's start. The sun filtered gently through the lush canopy, casting a warm, golden light over the forest floor. The air was alive with the sound of rustling leaves, chirping birds, and the soft babble of a nearby stream. Everything seemed to glow with a serene beauty, as if the forest itself was basking in the quiet joy of the morning. In the heart of this tranquil woodland, a woman moved with graceful ease, her every step in harmony with the natural world around her. Her long hair, the color of autumn leaves, cascaded down her back, catching the sunlight as she walked. She wore a simple flowing dress of forest green, blending seamlessly with her surroundings as though she were a part of the very earth she tread upon. She paused beside an ancient oak tree, its roots twisted and gnarled, reaching deep into the earth. Placing a hand on its rough bark, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the pulse of life beneath her fingers. The forest was alive, not just with the creatures that dwelled within it, but with a gentle magic that thrummed through every leaf and blade of grass. It was a magic she had known all her life, a comforting presence that had always been with her. As she continued her walk, she passed a cluster of wildflowers, their vibrant colors a feast for the eyes. She knelt down to pick up a few, her fingers deftly selecting the most beautiful blooms. There was no rush, no urgency in her actions, only the simple pleasure of being in this moment, in this place that she called home. A soft breeze stirred the leaves above, carrying with it the sweet scent of blooming jasmine and the distant laughter of a brook. The woman smiled to herself, a sense of peace settling over her like a warm blanket. The forest was her sanctuary, a place where she could truly be herself, where the worries of the world outside could not reach her. As she made her way to the edge of the small clearing, she was greeted by a familiar sight. A family of deer grazed peacefully in the meadow, their tawny coats gleaming in the sunlight. One of the younger fawns looked up at her, its large eyes filled with curiosity, before returning to its meal. She watched them for a while, her heart swelling with quiet contentment. This was the life she had chosen, far from the hustle and bustle of the cities beyond, the forest's edge. Here she found beauty in the simplest things, a bird's song, the feel of soft moss underfoot, the way the light danced through the trees. It was a life of quiet joy, where each day was a new adventure in its own way. And as she stood there, surrounded by the beauty of the forest, she knew that this journey, wherever it may lead her, would be one of peace, love, and endless wonder. Not far from the forest was a bustling city, filled with people living a life that required little sleep and the incessant striving for more success and wealth. Never truly feeling at peace, Lucas, a man in his early 30s with a neatly trimmed beard and hair that was just beginning to gray at the temples, knew there had to be more to his existence. For years, he had thrived in the fast paced world of finance, where every second was a calculated move, every interaction a transaction. But recently, the relentless noise of the city had begun to wear on him. The crowded streets, the blaring horns, the constant push to achieve more, do more, be more, it had all started to feel suffocating. He had longed for something different, something quieter, something that might remind him of the world beyond the city limits. That morning, he drove his car to the edge of the woods, and as he started his hike, he noticed the air was crisp, and it carried the scent of pine needles and wildflowers as he had made his way along the winding forest path. He had been walking for hours, the rhythmic crunch of leaves beneath his boots a stark contrast to the usual hum of city life. The forest was vast and unfamiliar, its towering trees and thick undergrowth a world away from the concrete jungle he had left behind. His clothes, though practical, still bore the marks of his city life: a tailored jacket, a well-worn briefcase slung over his shoulder, and shoes that were far more accustomed to pavement than dirt trails. His eyes, usually narrowed in concentration or glazed from the blue light of the endless screens, now held a hint of wonder as he took in his surroundings. And so, with little more than a hastily packed bag and a vague idea of where he was headed, Lucas had left the city behind. The forest he had been told, was a place of peace, a sanctuary for those seeking a different kind of life. He had heard whispers of a woman who lived deep within its heart, a woman who had found a way to live in harmony with the land, far from the chaos of modern existence. As he walked, the path grew narrower, the trees denser, until he found himself stranded at the edge of a small clearing. There, in the center, was a quaint cottage made of stone and wood, its roof covered in moss and ivy. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the sounds of a babbling stream could be heard in the distance. Lucas hesitated, feeling a pang of uncertainty. What was he doing here? So far from the life he had always known, but something within him urged him forward, a quiet voice that whispered of change, of possibility. He took a deep breath and stepped into the clearing. A woman appeared as if she had materialized from the very forest itself. She was tending to a garden by the side of the cottage, her hands gently cradling a sprig of lavender. She looked up as he approached her, her expression calm and welcoming. "Good morning," she greeted him, her voice soft and melodic like the rustle of leaves in the wind. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a deep serenity that made Lucas feel as though she had been expecting him all along. "Good morning," he replied, a little out of breath from his journey. I'm Lucas. I've come from the city." She nodded as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Welcome, Lucas. My name is Alara." There was a pause as Lucas took in the scene before him. The garden, the cottage, the woman who seemed to belong to this place as much as the trees and the sky above. It was everything he'd hoped for, and more. "I don't mean to intrude," he began, "but I've heard about you, about how you live here in peace away from everything. I've come to ask if you would teach me." Alara studied him for a moment, her eyes kind but discerning. "Teach you," she repeated. "Yes," Lucas said, his voice more certain now. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by noise, by people who are always rushing, always striving for more, but it's left me empty. I want to learn how to live differently, how to find peace in the way you have." Alara smiled, a warm, knowing smile that reached her eyes. "Peace is not something that can be taught, Lucas. It's something you must find within yourself. But if you're willing, I can show you what I have learned from this forest, from the life I've chosen. It will not be easy, and it will require patience. Are you sure you want this?" Lucas nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. "I'm sure." "Then come," Alara said, turning towards the cottage. "Let us begin." As Lucas followed her, the weight of his old life seemed to lift, replaced by the promise of something new, something beautiful. The city felt a world away. its noise and chaos fading like a distant memory. Here, in the heart of the forest, he would learn to listen to the quiet, to find solace and simplicity each day. His journey had only just begun, but already he knew it would change him in ways he could have never imagined. The morning sun bathed the forest in a soft golden light as Alara led Lucas to a small clearing not far from her cottage. The air was crisp, the earthy scent of damp moss and fresh leaves invigorating. Birds flitted from tree to tree, their songs a lively chorus that filled the silence. Alara moved with effortless grace, her steps light and sure as she walked through the undergrowth. Lucas, on the other hand, was less accustomed to the uneven terrain. His boots caught on roots more than once, and as he stumbled over hidden stones, he muttered apologies under his breath each time he lost his balance, frustration beginning to creep in. Alara glanced back at him, her expression serene. "There's no need to rush, Lucas," she said gently. "The forest has its own rhythm. Take your time and you'll find it easier to move with it." Lucas nodded, trying to relax, but it was easier said than done. The city had taught him to be quick, efficient, always on the move. And here the pace was slower, more deliberate, and it felt unnatural to him. Still, he was determined to learn, so he took a deep breath and focused on matching Alara's pace. They reached the clearing, where the morning sun cast dappled shadows on the ground. In the center stood a large stone worn smooth by time, and around it grew a variety of herbs and wildflowers. Alara knelt beside the stone, her fingers brushing the leaves of the plant with delicate purple flowers. "These are lavender," she explained in her calm voice. "They're good for calming the mind and the body. We'll harvest some today, but first you must learn to pick them properly. The forest gives generously, but we must take only what we need and leave the rest to grow." Lucas watched as she demonstrated her movements, precise and respectful. She selected a stem, careful not to disturb the surrounding plants, and with a gentle twist, she broke it free. She held it out to Lucas, a soft smile on her lips. "Your turn." Lucas hesitated, then crouched down beside her. His hands, used to tapping keyboards and handling papers, felt clumsy as he reached for the lavender. He picked a stem, but his grip was too tight, and he ended up crushing the delicate flowers in his hand. The scent of lavender filled the air, but Lucas frowned in disappointment. "I'm sorry," he muttered, shaking his head. "I didn't mean to ruin it." Alara's smile didn't waver. "It's all right, Lucas. It takes practice to learn how to handle the plants gently. The important thing is that you're trying. So let's try again, but this time focus on the plant, not what you're doing wrong." Lucas nodded, taking a deep breath in to steady himself. He reached for another stem, and this time, moving more slowly, more mindfully. He felt the texture of the leaves, the slight resistance as he twisted the stem, and finally he managed to pick the lavender without crushing it. "Well done," Alara said, her approval evident in her tone. "You see, it's about being present in the moment, not rushing, not worrying about getting it right. The forest rewards patience." As the day wore on, Alara taught Lucas other tasks: how to start a fire with flint and tinder, how to fetch water from the stream, and how to prepare a simple meal using the herbs they had gathered. Lucas struggled with each new lesson, his movements awkward, his mind racing with thoughts of how much easier it would be if he were back in the city. But Alara remained patient, her calm demeanor never faltering. She corrected him gently, never showing frustration or disappointment. Instead, she encouraged him to take breaks, to breathe, to listen to the sounds of the forest, and let its calm seep into him. By the time the sun began to set, Lucas was exhausted. His muscles ached from the unfamiliar work, and his mind was weary from the effort of trying to adapt to this new way of life. But as he sat beside the fire they had built together, watching the flames dance and listening to the crackle of the wood, he felt a small spark of satisfaction. It's harder than I thought it would be, Lucas admitted, looking across the fire at Alara. But I think I'm starting to understand what you meant about the rhythm of the forest. Alara smiled, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the fire. You've made good progress for your first day, Lucas. It's natural to feel out of place at first, but with time you'll find your own rhythm here. Remember, it's not about perfection. It's about learning to live in harmony with the world around you. Lucas nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him that he hadn't felt in a long time. The city was far away, its noise and chaos replaced by the gentle sounds of the forest and the steady presence of Alara. He knew he had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt hopeful that he could truly learn what it meant to live a quiet, meaningful life. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Lucas lay down on the soft earth, the scent of lavender still clinging to his hands. The forest whispered around him, a lullaby of rustling leaves and distant streams, and he closed his eyes, finally allowing himself to rest. The days had started to blend together, each one bringing Lucas closer to the understanding of the rhythm of the forest. He no longer stumbled over roots or snapped twigs underfoot, and the once unfamiliar sounds of the woodland were beginning to feel like a comforting melody. Alara's teachings, though simple, had gradually transformed the way he saw the world around him. One afternoon, Alara suggested they explore a part of the forest that Lucas hadn't seen yet. The sun was high, filtering through the canopy in golden shafts as they walked side by side. Alara carried a basket, its contents hidden beneath a cloth. Lucas had learned not to question her plans. She always seemed to know what they needed, even when he couldn't quite see it himself. They walked for a while in comfortable silence, the path winding deeper into the forest. Lucas noticed subtle changes in the landscape. The trees grew taller, their trunks thicker, and the underbrush less dense. The air felt cooler, tinged with a scent that was fresh and earthy, like the promise of rain. After what felt like an hour, Alara led him to a small, hidden glade surrounded by towering oaks. The ground was carpeted in soft moss, and in the center of the glade was a large, still pond, its surface like glass. The area was bathed in an otherworldly light, as if the sun had chosen this spot alone to shine. Lucas was struck by the tranquility of this place. It was different from the rest of the forest, more ancient, more sacred somehow. He could feel the weight of time here, as though the very air was heavy with the memories of the earth. Alara knelt by the pond and beckoned Lucas to join her. "This place is special," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Few know of it, and even fewer are permitted to enter. The forest keeps it hidden, revealing it only to those it deems worthy." Lucas looked at her, a question in his eyes, but Alara only smiled and handed him the basket. "I want you to open it." Curious, Lucas removed the cloth covering the basket and found a collection of smooth, polished stones in various shades of green and blue. They glimmered in the sunlight, their colors deep and rich. "These are wishing stones," Alara explained. "Each one carries a small piece of the forest's magic. If you cast one into the pond and make a wish with a pure heart, the forest may choose to answer it." Lucas stared at the stones, feeling a sense of wonder and disbelief. "You mean real magic?" Alara nodded. "The forest is alive in ways that most people can't even begin to understand. It's a place where the boundary between the natural and the supernatural blurs. The stones are a gift, a reminder that there's more to the world than what we can see with our eyes." Lucas hesitated, then selected a deep green stone, its surface cool and smooth to the touch. He closed his eyes, thinking about all that had brought him here. The noise of the city, the emptiness that had driven him to seek something more, and the peace he had begun to find in this forest. He wished not for anything specific, but simply for a deeper connection to this place, to understand its mysteries and its magic. With a deep breath, Lucas cast the stone into the pond. It made a soft splash, ripples spreading across the water's surface. And for a moment, nothing happened, and Lucas wondered if he had done it wrong. But then the ripples began to glow faintly, a soft light radiating from the center of the pond. Lucas watched in awe as the light grew brighter, the water shimmering with a glow. The air around them seemed to vibrate with energy, and Lucas felt a strange tingling sensation in his chest, as if the forest itself was acknowledging him. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the light faded, and the pond returned to its still being. The glade was silent, the only sound the gentle rustling of the leaves in the breeze. Alara watched him with a knowing smile. "The forest has accepted your wish, Lucas. It may not be granted in the way that you expect, but it will guide you on the path you need to take." Lucas felt a deep sense of gratitude and wonder. He had come to the forest seeking peace, but he had found something far greater, an understanding of the world that went beyond the physical, a connection to a deeper, older magic that had always been there, just out of sight. As they left the glade and made their way back to the cottage, Lucas couldn't help but glance back at the pond. He felt different, lighter, as if a veil had been lifted and he could now see the world in a new light. "Thank you," Lucas said quietly, breaking the silence. Alara looked at him, her eyes twinkling. "The forest has much to teach, Lucas, but remember, the greatest lessons are often the ones we discover ourselves. Trust in the journey, and you'll find what you're looking for." Lucas nodded, feeling a newfound respect for both Alara and the forest. He had come here seeking a way to escape the chaos of his old life, but he was beginning to realize that this journey was about more than that. It was about discovering the magic in the world around him, and perhaps even the magic within himself. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Lucas walked beside Alara, feeling a quiet sense of wonder at the mysteries that still lay ahead. The next morning, Lucas awoke with a strange sense of anticipation. The glade, with its glowing pond and the mysterious energy that had thrummed through the air, had left him both exhilarated and curious. The forest, which had once seemed so serene and straightforward, now felt like a place full of hidden secrets. And Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that those secrets were waiting for him to discover. Alara was already awake when he stepped outside, the morning sun casting a warm glow over the cottage. She was tending to a small herb garden near the edge of the clearing, her movements fluid and purposeful. Lucas watched her for a moment, marveling at how she seemed to belong to this world in a way that he was only beginning to understand. "Good morning, Lucas," Alara greeted him without looking up, as if she had sensed his presence before he had even made a sound. "Good morning," Lucas replied, still feeling the lingering wonder from the previous day. "I was wondering, are there other places like the glade, other magical spots in the forest?" Alara smiled softly, finally turning to face him. "The forest is full of magic, Lucas. Some of it is visible, like the glade, while other parts are more subtle, hidden beneath its surface. But yes, there are places of power scattered throughout these woods. Each one is unique in its own purpose and energy." Lucas felt a thrill of excitement. "Can we visit another one?" Alara considered him for a moment and then nodded. "There's a place not far from here, deeper in the forest, but it's different from the glade, more unpredictable. The forest can be wild at times, and the magic there reflects that. If you wish to go, you must be prepared for whatever we might encounter." Lucas felt a shiver of apprehension, but his curiosity outweighed his fear. "I'm ready," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Alara led the way, and soon they were walking through parts of the forest Lucas hadn't explored. The trees here were older, their trunks twisted and knotted, and the air was cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. The path they followed was less defined, more like a natural trail carved by animals than a route for human travelers. As they ventured deeper, the atmosphere around them began to change. The forest grew quieter, the usual sounds of the birds rustling in the leaves fading away. The light, too, seemed to dim, as though the sun's rays struggled to penetrate the dense canopy overhead. Lucas felt a prickling sense on the back of his neck, a growing awareness that they were entering a place where the rules of the natural world didn't quite apply. After what felt like an hour of walking, they emerged into a narrow ravine. The walls of the ravine were steep, lined with moss-covered rocks, and a narrow stream trickled through the center. Alara paused at the edge, her eyes scanning the surroundings with a look of quiet intensity. "This is the Hollow," she said softly. "It's a place where the forest's energy runs deep, but it can be volatile. The magic here is tied to the elements: earth, water, air, and fire. Sometimes the Hollow is calm, but other times it can be unpredictable." Lucas felt a twinge of unease and nodded. "What do we do here?" "We observe," Alara replied, "and we listen. The Hollow can teach us much, but we must be patient and respectful. The forest doesn't give up its secrets easily." They moved down into the ravine, the sound of the stream growing louder as they approached. Lucas noticed that the air here felt charged, as if an unseen force was crackling just beneath the surface. The ground beneath his feet was soft and slightly spongy, and he could also see strange, delicate plants growing along the water's edge, their leaves shimmering with a faint, otherworldly light. Alara knelt by the stream, her hands hovering just above the water. "This stream is more than it seems," she explained. "It's connected to the lifeblood of the forest. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you can catch glimpses of the past or even the future in its reflections." Lucas watched as Alara dipped her fingers into the water, her eyes fixed on the rippling surface. For a moment, nothing happened, but then the water began to shimmer, and a series of images appeared, fleeting like reflections on glass. Lucas saw flashes of animals, trees, and distant landscapes, all swirling together in a mesmerizing dance. He knelt beside her, reaching out to touch the water as well, but as soon as his fingers brushed the surface, the images vanished, and the stream returned to its normal state. Disappointed, Lucas frowned. Why didn't it work for me? Alara looked at him with a knowing smile. "The Hollow reveals its secrets when it's ready, not before. You can't force it, Lucas. You must learn to let go of control, to trust in the flow of the magic in the forest." As they continued to explore the Hollow, the air grew thicker, and Lucas noticed that the environment around them was changing. The plants seemed to be moving, their leaves swaying even though there was no wind. The stream began to bubble and churn, as if agitated by some unseen force. "Alara," Lucas said, his voice tinged with concern. "Is this normal?" Alara's expression grew more serious. "The Hollow is reacting to our presence. The forest is testing us." Suddenly a low rumble echoed through the ravine, and the ground beneath them shook. The water in the stream surged, spilling over its banks, and the air around them grew charged with static. Lucas's heart raced as he glanced around, unsure of what was happening. "Alara!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the growing roar of the stream. "What's going on?" Alara remained calm, though her eyes were focused and alert. "Stay close to me, Lucas. The Hollow is awakening. We must be careful." Before Lucas could respond, the ground beneath them split open with a thunderous crack, and a geyser of water shot into the air, drenching them. The force of the eruption sent Lucas stumbling backwards, his foot slipping on the wet ground. He fell, landing hard on his back, the air knocked from his lungs. "Alara!" he gasped, struggling to get up as the ground continued to tremble, but Alara was already by his side, helping him to his feet. "We need to leave now," she urged, her voice firm but calm. "The Hollow is unstable. It's too dangerous to stay here." They turned to leave, but the path they had taken into the ravine was now blocked by a tangled web of roots and rocks that had been dislodged by the shifting earth. Panic surged through Lucas as he realized they were trapped. Alara, we're stuck! Alara's gaze swept the ravine, her mind working quickly. There's another way out, but it's risky. We have to trust the forest to guide us. With no other options, Lucas followed Alara as she led them along the edge of the ravine, her movements deliberate and sure. The ground continued to shake, the water from the stream swirled around their ankles, but Alara pressed on, her calm demeanor unwavering. They reached a narrow crevice in the ravine wall, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. Alara gestured for Lucas to go first. This way, quickly. Lucas hesitated, fear clawing at his chest, but he forced himself to move. He slipped into the crevice, the cold, damp rock pressing against his sides as he inched forwards. The ground continued to rumble, and he could hear the roar of the stream growing louder behind him. Finally, they emerged on the other side, and the forest once again calm and quiet. The ground beneath their feet was solid, and the air was still. Lucas collapsed onto the ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Alara knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You did well, Lucas. The hollow tested you, and you made it through. Lucas looked up at her, still shaken by the experience. What was that? Why did the forest react like that? Alara smiled gently, her eyes filled with understanding. The forest is alive, Lucas. It senses when we are out of balance. The hollow is trying to show you something important, that you can't control everything no matter how hard you try. And sometimes you have to let go and trust in the natural flow of things. It's a difficult lesson, but one that's necessary for living in harmony with this world. Lucas nodded, her words sinking in. The city had taught him to always be in control, to plan and predict every outcome, but here in the forest, those rules didn't apply. The forest demanded something different, a surrender to its rhythms, a willingness to trust in the unknown. As they made their way back to the cottage, the adrenaline from their escape slowly faded, replaced by a deep sense of respect and humility. Lucas realized that he still had much to learn, not just about the forest, but about himself. The mysteries of the forest were vast and sometimes frightening, but they were also full of wisdom. That night, as Lucas lay under the stars, the events of the day replayed in his mind. The hollow had shown him that the forest was not just a peaceful sanctuary, but a place of power, a living entity with its own will and desires. And in that realization, he found a new sense of purpose, to learn and to grow. The months in the forest had passed in quiet, steady rhythm, each day bringing Lucas closer to understanding not just the world around him, but also the world within him. The man who had arrived, burdened by the noise and chaos of city life, had slowly given way to someone new, someone who could hear whispers of the wind through the trees, who could feel the pulse of life in the soil beneath his feet. Lucas had learned to listen to the birds' morning songs, to the rustle of leaves, to the soft flow of the stream that wound its way through the forest. But more importantly, he had learned to listen to himself. The constant need to plan, control, to predict, those habits had begun to fade, replaced by a deeper trust in the flow of life. It wasn't about abandoning reason or foresight, but about finding a balance, about understanding that sometimes the best way to move forward was to let go. One crisp autumn morning, in the first frost dusted the forest floor, Lucas stood at the edge of the glowing pond in the hidden glade. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and earth. The trees around him were dressed in shades of amber and gold, their leaves gently drifting to the ground like whispered farewells to summer. Alara joined him, her presence as serene as the forest itself. She had guided him through so much, through moments of doubt and discovery, through the challenges that had tested not just his physical abilities, but his spirit as well. And now as they stood together, the silence between them was filled with a shared understanding. The forest changed you, Alara said softly, her gaze thoughtful. When you first came here, You were seeking peace, an escape from the life you knew, but what you found is much more than that. Lucas nodded, his eyes reflecting the calm surface of the pond. I came here to get away from the noise, to find a place where I could breathe. But in the process, I've discovered things I never expected about the forest, about magic, about myself. It's like the forest has shown me who I really am beneath all the layers of the life I used to live. Alara smiled, a gentle expression full of pride and warmth. That's the true magic of this place, Lucas. It doesn't just change the world around you, it changes the world within you. You've learned to see with new eyes, to hear with new ears. And in doing so, you've become part of the forest story. Lucas looked out over the pond, its thoughts drifting back over the months he had spent here. He remembered the early days when everything had been so unfamiliar, when he had stumbled through the underbrush and struggled to understand the simplest of tasks. He thought of the hollow and its tests, of the nights spent under the stars, when the sky had seemed so vast and full of possibilities. And he thought of the quiet moments, the ones that had seemed so insignificant at the time, but had slowly, steadily woven themselves into the fabric of his being. The forest has taught me so much, Lucas said, his voice tinged with a deep gratitude. But I think the most important lesson has been about acceptance, about letting go of the need to control everything and just be present. I used to think that I had to shape the world to my will, to bend it to my every plan. But now I see that the world has its own wisdom, its own rhythm, and when I listen to that, when I trust it, things seem to fall into place. Alara nodded, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the morning. You've learned well, Lucas. The forest has given you its gifts, and in return you've given it your trust. That's a rare and precious thing. Lucas took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. There was a peace within him now, a stillness that had once seemed so elusive, but there was also a sense of anticipation, of readiness for whatever lay ahead. I don't know what comes next, he admitted, but I feel like I'm ready for it, whatever it is. Alara turned to him, her expression thoughtful. Life, like the forest, is full of surprises. It will continue to challenge you, to test what you've learned. But you're no longer the same person who came here all those months ago. You've grown, you've transformed, and that will guide you no matter where you go. Lucas felt a swell of emotion, a deep appreciation for all that Alara had done for him, for all that the forest had given him. He knew that his journey wasn't over. It was just beginning in a way he couldn't have imagined when he first arrived. Thank you, Alara, he said, his voice steady, for everything, for showing me the way. Alara smiled, her bright eyes with understanding. The forest will always be here, Lucas, whenever you need it, and so will I. As they stood together, the sun began to rise higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the glade. The world around them was alive with a quiet beauty of the changing season, the air filled with the promise of new beginnings. Lucas knew that it was time to move forward, to take what he had learned and carry it with him wherever his path might lead. The forest had given him the tools he needed, not just to survive, but to thrive, to find joy and peace in the simple, profound moments of life. And as he looked out over the pond, watching the leaves dance on the water's surface, Lucas felt a deep sense of contentment. The city with its noise and chaos was a distant memory now. This was where he belonged, in this moment, in this place of quiet magic and endless possibility. He was ready for whatever came next, with the forest lessons rooted deeply in his heart.